Hi, everyone. Oh my gosh, I missed you all. Welcome to the Opulence Abundance University. Today we're going to be talking about anger and healing from anger. And before we get started, talking about the healing power of anger, I just want us to take 3 breaths together. So let's just breathe at our own pace. Thank you for pausing to breathe with me. Thank you all for being here. My name is Opulence Abundance. I'm a healing professional, a speaker, and a conflict navigator. And today I wanted to talk about anger and how anger, as an emotion, as something we feel, how that can be healing to us. And before we jump in, I'm so excited about this conversation today because I really do believe anger can change us, and I see in our culture that anger is so repressed that a lot of the examples we see of how anger is expressed out is dangerous. And so creating safety around anger is really powerful. But we're going to start by reading a little of Alexis Pauline Gumb's Archive, my favorite. And we're actually going to start with the Archive of Fire. In the center of her chest, the fist-sized muscle was turning back to carbon again, burning black and then blacker, like it wanted to be a diamond. The scroll had said her heart would change, but she never imagined it meant this. Here on this planet of sulfur and memories, she leaned her cracked back on the hot and broken ground. Was this lava or her blood? Volcano or revelation? What she was breathing would not have been called air, except that it was everywhere, except that she was breathing it. There was never rain, but she waited for lightning to find her. The mercury of her veins aligned with the shock of being here, after everything and before whatever. Her heart was accelerated cold, growing deep, dark, and sharp. She kept on breathing, prostrate, burning, knowing soon it would be clear and unbreakable. Her beautiful blackening heart. She didn't know she was waiting. She only knew she was breathing, and her breath shifted to the breathing of a being that knew something was moving, that something was coming closer and closer every day. So she waited for what she didn't know. Could she say for whom? Or was she just wishful thinking? At some point, she heard new voices, not known voices, not the voices she knew. The new, unknown voices sounded frozen and far away and close and closer, like breaking shells. They asked, "Where are you?" And she said, "Here," but not with her mouth, just with her being. She said, "Here," repeatedly, repeated infinitely, just by the fact of her being here. At last, she felt a contraction. And as she could not move, she could not see, and she could not smell anything or have any real sense of what the sulfur was doing to her skin, or whether she had skin at all. She just stayed there, but that was the arrival. And without needing her long, beat out eardrums, they asked her the question, "Have we made the crossing?" And that was when she knew. Finally, she could cry. At first, nobody signed up for the courses, some knowing it would add them to surveillance lists, make it harder to fly, insert clicks into their phone conversations, make their windows more windows, and some didn't need to know that, already having told themselves that freedom wasn't allowed specifically, so they wouldn't have to ponder the consequences. But eventually they showed up, with the only permitted writing utensil, the crayon, melting in their hands. Soon enough, they realized they would have to memorize everything, internalize all of it, keep it in their bodies. Soon enough, there would be nowhere else to keep anything anyway. And the people watching eventually saw the patterns. They knew to watch for singing and the radiance vibrating off their skin of the student teachers. Many felt so attracted they begged to go into deep cover to infiltrate the courses, and each and every one was welcome and converted. Freedom is not a secret, it is a practice. It's contagious. The would be infiltrators could not get the songs out of their skin. They could not resell out the places where they had internalized freedom. They could not undo the implications of the rituals they thought they were sneaking into. And that's how, one at a time, the watchers became watched, the new attractors of their bewildered colleagues, pushed seemingly by the desire to crack the core. But actually, it was their desire to access freedom. People called it a cult and a misguided fad. Stand up comedians compared the sessions to key parties with swingers. Even radicals dismissed it as just hopeful and insufficient as 1970s feminist consciousness raising groups. Religious leaders just thought they were Baha'i, but eventually curriculum was everywhere, transmitted between roommates and on buses with the tenderness of love. There were children showing up qualified to teach all the advanced courses. They needed bigger and bigger spaces, so they started to meet outside. And then they didn't need classrooms at all because practices were just jumping off everywhere. Not without effort, but without force, all day, through their eating and conversation. Sometimes they stopped and marveled about how thoroughly they had replaced the story that was there before, but usually they just stayed in the practice and watched the world transform. Wow. Thank you, Alexis Pauline Gums. Excuse me, Dr. Alexis Pauline Gums, for that incredible reading about the future and how we might be transformed. Um, yeah, if you are with me, please drop an emoji. Let me know you're here and listening. And if you're able, let me know, even if you're watching in the future, would love to know just through emoji, like, what is your relationship to anger? I can speak to my relationship to anger. And as I do this, I'm going to bring back a movement practice. I actually think before I go into anger, I should have us do a movement practice that's not ongoing through the session. And so this is one of my favorite new practices I learned. And it's just to create a sense of wholeness in the body and to kind of develop that mind body connection. And so it's it has a name that feels a little culturally appropriate. So I'm going to call it the 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, right? And so we're going to just start with our hands over our heart space. With our other hand, we'll hit this hand, so we'll go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And then we'll take that same rhythm to our shoulders and just go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And then we'll take our hands to our lower back and just gently knock in that same rhythm. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And then to the sides of our legs. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And if you want, you can do your feet, but I'm just going to stop there. That movement did feel kind of nice and grounding. So we need all the grounding we can get because we are about to talk about anger. Anger is an emotion that I often think of fire, right? Like, and fire. So like when we think of the sun, which is this ball of fire, right? The sun is part of, like, the sun awakens us, right? Like when we feel warmth of the sun, it signals something in our bodies, and it signals something in animals and plants. And what it signals in plants is growth, right? And so there's a way where, like, we have this powerful connection to fire. Often people compare the sun. Joy Harjo, in one of her poems, talks about the heart as the smaller cousin to the sun. There's a connection between the heart fire that keeps our bodies going and this fire in the sky. And when we think of fire as an element, fire helps us cook food, right? Fire supports us in staying warm. Fire is transformative, it's purifying. In Hindu tradition, people are cremated, not buried. And the fire, it's actually seen as like the final ceremony. And they talk about it as the soul being purified and freed from the body. So fire being transformative, fire being purifying, right? But fire can also cause destruction. Fire can physically burn our skin. Fire can destroy. And, forest fires, while destructive, are also generative because, like, there are trees and pine cones that only open after they've reached a certain temperature. I mean, so powerful. So, fire is an element with a lot going on. Similarly, anger can burn us. Anger can cause us to harm others. Anger can destroy aspects of our life. I don't know if you're a newsletter reader. Shout out to the newsletter. If you don't already, please subscribe to the newsletter, where I kind of explore these concepts of fire causing harm, of anger can cause harm. And in our culture, I feel anger is so repressed that really when I see people being angry, it's often because they've been pushed in some way, right? Like they've tried to hold it in and then they ingest a substance, like they drink a bunch of alcohol and the truth comes out. Or, and then people view the people being angry, like the ex-girlfriend or whoever it is, we see them as crazy. There's a way where being angry is almost like being without dignity. And then another context of anger that I think is more respected, but again, seen without dignity, is movement spaces, right? Kind of naming like we should get angry about these injustice. So that anger sort of being like not us being in harm, not personal anger, but almost a collective anger. In all of this, I am a conflict mediator. I am working with people who have caused harm. And in this, I often notice like, how does anger create conditions for our harm when we feel righteous in our anger? How does that change the way we approach things? When we feel righteous in our anger, what are we feeling entitled to or deserving of? Good questions to reflect on when we're feeling really angry at someone or when we're feeling really defensive around actions that people are like letting us know are not okay. Um, so when we think about anger, I think my big message of today is a short message. It's a Monday, bear with me. Is just that anger is something for us to tend to proactively. So if we think of anger as our inner fire, we want that fire to sustain. We don't want it living in embers. Or maybe we do. Maybe we just want to cultivate some embers in our heart, right? And that sounds kind of bad. I know that in Buddhism, they're often like, you should forgive because it's like carrying an ember in your heart and it can burn you and it can burn you out. So I think when I say this, I think I'm trying to say, like, I think it's okay to hold a healthy anger. But it's also okay for anger to be a fleeting emotion. I also don't really think it's an emotion we're meant to like attach to or hold on to, but it's an emotion that can take us places. And when this emotion shows up, I always celebrate it. I really celebrate anger, especially if we've been in situations where we aren't looking out for ourselves, where we're doing a lot of like self sacrificing. I think anger can awaken us and it can give us the energy we need to dramatically change situations, right? But I think the big question is, how do we hold our anger, honor, celebrate our anger, but also pull our anger back in from being something that harms others. So I do think, and I have a lot of empathy for people who have strong emotions. I have a big emotional body. Emotions sometimes overwhelm me. It's hard to see around them. And I think like step zero is self care. It's having a care plan. I created a care plan. You all can access it. But having a care plan, it's having some reference point, um, or like some way to ground ourselves. So I don't think we should go into our anger when we're ungrounded. If you are activated and really angry, all the more reason to get grounded. And I think grounding through movement, whether that's a bike ride, dancing, kickboxing, whatever it is, really powerful. But I think removing yourself from a situation or a conversation or contact with a person where you might cause harm is wise. I think it's so wise. I think it's so powerful to when the emotions are so big to choose to ground. And then I think it's important to explore that emotion either with a professional or on your own. And on my own looks like painting, screaming, journaling, but trying to just on one level just honor the emotion and feel the emotion and react to the emotion in my body. And then the journaling piece is just to better understand where that emotion is coming from. What am I really angry about? Am I angry that my friend didn't call me back? Or am I feeling really lonely and scared? I think they're just really important questions to ask. Okay, so the other side of all of this is we're talking about anger, talking about feeling scared, feeling angry. Um, the other thing coming up when we think about anger and managing anger is, there's anger that we feel really big in our body, and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't ignore this. In that case, as I said, isolate, take time. And then when we think about anger as a slower burn, maybe something happens and we freeze in the moment, or something happens and we laugh it off, but we can't stop thinking about it. Anger that we maybe ruminate on, a lot of us, myself included, like I definitely for a long time didn't feel any anger, but it would come out in resentment over time. And I think what that speaks to is a big disconnection between the body and mind. Um, so we feel things somatically in our body. And when we reflect on those feelings, that's kind of how we have a conscious, right? So reflection on a body feeling. So some things happen, like maybe our partner discloses that they cheated on us. We say it's fine, or like maybe something a little less severe. Maybe our partner's like, "Oh yeah, I was late, but I was just at so and so's apartment," right? We feel that anger, but maybe we also feel fear and anxiety and confusion. Maybe we feel so many other emotions, and it might even be difficult to know what we feel. So if you're someone that's very disconnected from your anger, I think I would look at strengthening that body mind connection, just proactively. But if you're in a situation where you feel like where you're if you're in a situation where there is some anger repeatedly coming up with a person and you should feel it, but you're not feeling it, that's a dangerous situation. And I would encourage you to step out, like to get some space from that relationship and to really work with a professional. I think the signs of numbness, not having feelings you're supposed to have going along with the emotions, I'm describing a fawn response. And I think fawn responses are often what silence us. I think the tricky thing about trauma responses is that very often we might be working out a pattern we learned at a young age. And so people can activate those responses in us And unfortunately, the responses can be so immersive that it can be difficult to like halt the momentum and pull ourselves out and back into intention. There is this principle that's like the intervention should match the harm. So I think this is a situation where it can be really good for us to understand what are our baselines in relationship? What are our baselines for respect, for how people talk to us, for how people treat us? And if one of those things gets violated, it doesn't always matter, especially if we're not having difficulty accessing certain emotions, how we feel about it. But we can note that if this line gets crossed, then that's a sign for an intervention. And maybe that intervention is taking some space. All of this to say that our anger is our self interest, our anger is a sign of vitality and self protection. And I personally think it's really exciting if we're feeling angry because it means we care about ourselves. And so, in the vein of that, I'm just out here celebrating anger with you guys. I'm glad we're open to getting angry together. You know, and I spoke to this in the newsletter that like sometimes we avoid anger cuz it's scary. We can feel scared. But if we can open to being like I can feel anger and I cannot lose myself. So that might not be true for you. And I think if like when exploring anger, if you are someone that loses yourself in the emotion, that's a good reason to work with the professional. Part of avoidance is like we avoid something because we're scared of it. And then when we do engage with it because we've avoided it, sometimes we have a bad experience. Like school. Let's say you avoid going to school, so you miss 4 days. When you finally go to school, you have a lot of homework to catch up on. And that can feel really overwhelming and really scary. And it reinforces the cycle, right? Versus when we feel avoidance, if we can kind of catch the feeling and say like even though this is scary, I'm going to do this anyways. Sometimes we still have a bad experience, right? We might not be supported at school, it might be a place of violence. And I think that's the advocacy for like when we're confronting what we're avoiding to get help, you know, to maybe explore options to make it easier. But when it comes to anger, the more we avoid anger, the stronger that emotion is. And at times, it can also contribute to our self abandonment because when we avoid anger, we're like avoiding the part of ourselves that is holding the anger, right? And so it creates some internal separation, fragmentation. It can create anger. Hey, Diana, I'm so glad you're here. So that's why it's really important for us. It might mean working with a professional, but creating space to breathe into that feeling. I'm just naturally starting to move as I talk because anger is an emotion we experience in the body, and it is an emotion of a boundary being crossed. When it flares up, it's a sign that something has felt violating, it's crossed our boundaries. If we're disconnected to that body cue, sadly, it's likely that there was some time in our lives where we were unable to be connected to that anger or that cue. It wasn't safe for us. So then we experienced a separation between the somatic feeling and our mind. And that disassociation, that fracture between body sensation and mind, it can stay with us. And part of healing is repairing that connection between body and mind, especially around emotion. And that's why I'm rubbing my hands, you guys. And this is a great way when you're hearing this stuff to just rub the hands because it's so sensory. It can keep us engaged when we talk about difficult things. So when we look at healing our relationship to anger, we're really talking about relationship to the body and the mind. So when we feel a feeling in our body and then our mind is like, nope, time to open Amazon, time to go shopping. That's a pattern we can observe to say like, oh, I noticed that every time my ex's name came up, I just went straight to Amazon, right? So a lot of our work of healing is just self observation and catching our patterns and bringing ourselves into the uncomfortable feeling. And I just can't say it enough. Like, this healing work is so deep, it's so sensitive. Like, we're just not meant to do it alone, and that's okay. So thank you for joining me today, just exploring this concept of anger and how we can not just heal with it, but be more present for our body, for our embodied experience of anger, how we can heal that relationship with our body, and ultimately just turn towards our anger with love. But yeah, thank you all for being with me today. I will see you Friday. And if you are not already a newsletter subscriber, please subscribe. Love you all. Bye. Mwah.